we are recording.
All right, and I see our minutes recorder. That's good. Lydia, I appreciate how you wrote minutes recorder in your name. That's helpful. Thank you, Lydia. All right, we can get started, and hopefully Jose will jump in at some point. Leah, I see Beatrice in the attendees too, if you want to move her over here.
I'll check with her and see if that's what she wants.
Okay. So agenda and materials review. And at this point, this is when we need to talk about the two incident, what are they called, Leah? The two additional things. Inquiry.
Yeah, I believe they're both incident reviews. I called one of them an inquiry, but I think they're both incident reviews.
Okay. So the two kind of little cases that we saw, in addition to our two big cases, we need to talk about if there's anything in there that we would like to discuss. We should find a place in the agenda to fit that in. So we have the one from the January 9th, the riot that happened. And then we have the one, oh my gosh, where is my brain? What was the other one?
It was another one related to the community impact case.
Oh yeah.
So there was one related to the community impact case, and there's one from a demonstration on January 9th. So
yeah. So if anybody wants to add that to the agenda, this would be the time to request that. Okay. Bill, you unmuted?
Yeah, I just was going to say, I thought the information you gave us was interesting, but I'm not sure we need to review any of that based on what I read and what I saw.
All right. Is that kind of the consensus? Do you want to give like a thumbs up if we agree that it was interesting to hear it and read it and see it, but don't need to speak? Okay. Lindsay, did you want to say something?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time discussing it. I agree, Bill, that it was good for the sake of transparency that we got the information. I guess I was just thinking, I don't know if, would anybody who is involved in making those complaints be here tonight to hear about them? And if you see what I'm saying, like in that case, it would make sense to me that we would discuss them more. But otherwise, I don't see a need to I think we'll probably run out of time, I think, to talk if we try to talk about all the things. Anyway, yeah.
I don't see that anyone in our attendees is involved in any of those. And then I'm trying to recall, I don't think that I mentioned in the closing letters, if they are finished indeed, that they were going to be reviewed tonight. So seems unlikely. I apologize for that. I will get to that in the auditor's report about workload concerns. So yeah, I don't think that that's an issue.
Okay, thanks. That's my only concern.
That's a good concern. I think maybe we can circle back during our individual comments from board members after we hear public comment and respond in that forum, perhaps, if we have that. So do we have any other adjustments to make to the agenda or comments on the materials? Nope. Okay, so we will go forward with the agenda as posted, which means it is time for public comment. Leah, do you want to do the public comment spiel?
Sure. So if anyone would like to make a public comment, you may have 3 minutes to do so. I would ask you to raise your hand at the bottom of the Zoom screen. There's a little place where you can raise your hand. No one is called in, so I'm not going to give the dial-in instructions. And if anyone wants to give public comment and somehow has issues raising their hand, please go ahead and email our office at policeauditor, that's just one word, policeauditor @eugene-or.gov. I'm not seeing anyone with their hands raised, so I think we may be finished with public comment.
All right, so let's move into comments from board members and commission liaisons. Bill, I will start with you and then go to Rick.
Thank you, Carolyn. The only thing is I will talk a little bit. I want to thank Brian and the other investigator for putting those two incident reports together. There was a lot of good information. I know there was a lot of people that thought that especially the 9th was handled different than other protests that got violent. But I didn't see anything in that or in the investigation that turned that to be handled any different than what I think our normal policy is for doing that. So that's all I have to add. Thank you.
All right, Rick, and then Lindsay.
Okay, I assume you want to report on the police ad hoc police committee. My job on any of the subcommittees is over with. I was on the oversight subcommittee, and that was, in my opinion, kind of hijacked by a couple of people who had some issues that they wanted to force through. Some of those have passed by the committee. Some of them are still waiting to be heard or still waiting to be voted on. The committee has bogged down somewhat because of the number of people involved. There are a lot of people, a lot of interests that want to be expressed, and it's understandable, I think, that it's taken a while. As a result, someone last week made a motion to ask the city council for an additional 2 meetings, and I don't know whether that has been voted on by the city council yet or not. I'm not certain whether we're going to have those. Otherwise, there has to be a report issued by March 31st. I would not want to be the people that are writing the report because there's a lot of stuff to put in there, and I'm not sure everyone's going to be pleased at what comes out. Hopefully the city council and the city attorney will be able to wrestle with it and decide what they can do as a council to accomplish the things that the committee would like to see accomplished. Many of the things that have been suggested relate to things that need to be changed at the federal government level, the state government level, the ordinances that which may have to be voted on, and changes to the union contract, which would have to be bargained for. So there are a lot of things that have been asked for, but there are not very many of them are some things that the city council can do. And I think that's going to be a tough sell for the city council when they have to face the committee and they don't do as much as the committee wants them to do. That's just my gut personal feeling about it.
Thanks, Rick. Lindsay, and then Michael.
At the last police commission meeting, we got an update from Lieutenant Mozan about EPD's response to illegal camping, and just to sort of a question and answer session about how EPD is transitioning out of the more direct enforcement of banned camping and is taking a more what's the right word? They're on hand when campers are being asked to move in some situations, but they're not the primary contacts with people. So that's being shifted over to parks and open space. So there, I think, is continuing recognition that police are not the right tool for every job, and that if there's a different way to interact with people, that might be a good thing. There's still, we still received public testimony, and there were still lots of comments about the concerns about moving people in any case, given the context of the pandemic and some of the extenuating circumstances for people who are unhoused and trying to shelter in place the best they can. So it was a robust, complicated discussion. I'm sure it's a discussion we'll continue to have. We also reviewed the field force policy. So there's a series of policies that are being looked at in response to the protests in May, and the field force was the one that we looked at and had great discussion about. And I think it'll be coming back to the police commission to, we didn't make a vote to sort of finalize a recommendation. It was, it will come back. And Michael will be your police commission rep from now on, so I'm sure he'll follow up with whatever comes of the field force recommendations and the rest of the policies that'll be looked at in response to the May protests. In terms of the ad hoc committee, we heard testimony from people who have been impacted by mostly cases. Actually, I think in every case we had publicly reviewed the cases from the people who had came to provide testimony, and I really appreciated and I'm very thankful for all the people who came to the ad hoc to make testimony. You know, they're sharing some the hardest days of their life, and they're reliving those things, and they did so bravely, and I think it was important to hear from them. It gave them a forum that we don't really have here to hear from the public, and so I really appreciated that that people did that, and hearing from them and having sort of a long form public record of what their experience was. There are a lot of motions on the table. There's a lot of disagreement about which directions we should go, and I think that's okay. I agree that it will be a very difficult report to write, and I hope what comes of it is a lot of nuance about the different things that people said, and that people can, that the minority voices on various topics are preserved within the record, because I think that's going to be important. We did pass some motions about trying to expand options for non-police response to various types of crisis. And so I think that will be, I think that was, there was a lot of really good work that people did that went into making those recommendations. And I look forward to seeing what comes of that. And for example, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but I think that I'm really glad that people took the time to flesh out some of their ideas and to talk to people who work at Cahoots and other first responders who are non-police first responders to think about how we might shift to more non-police response. I think I did see, Rick, that council has granted us 2 more meetings. So mid-April is now the date that the ad hoc committee will wrap things up. And that's it for now. Thanks.
Thanks, and thank you for your time on the police commission. It's helpful. So the city council was able to appoint Michael to that seat.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Michael, and then Jose, please.
Yeah, so let's see. I don't think I have any opening comments. I would just regarding the incident reviews. I would say I would agree with what folks have said, but just so that it shows up in the minutes, to note that there were there was like a minor kind of I don't know what to call it exactly, but a concern that emerged related to the January protest that is being addressed, and so that's nice to see, since it was something that came up in more than one of the complaints related to that.
Thanks, Jose, and then Bernadette, please.
Yeah, I don't have any opening comments as far as contributions go yet, but is this the time to comment on the incident reviews?
I think so, yeah.
I think I just want to make it known. I also put it down on the record that I was on Twitter that day and saw I think the video that's being referred to here, and wrote and deleted at least a few emails to Leah because I wanted to be like, I saw this. I don't know what my role is in this. I'm really, I have a really strong reaction to what I'm seeing. So I'm also glad to see this because I was really, didn't quite have the language or the experience to be able to like bring that up. And I'm still trying to like think about like and understand my responsibility and implotment and all this. So yeah, thank you.
But can I, anytime you have a reaction like that, seriously, feel free to send me an email or a text or just call and we can talk it out and I can let you know if we're, you know, if we've already gotten complaints, if we're gonna do, you know, we can talk about all of that stuff. I want to help you guys, so.
I do that
Cool,
all the
thank you,
time.
Leah.
Bernadette.
Lindsay, I just have a couple questions from the ad hoc committee. When you said that people were testifying and so the minority voice was being heard, are we talking minority as in persons of color minority, or are we talking minority as in people that you feel voices are not heard? I guess I just need to understand that a little bit more.
Thank you. That's a great question. What I mean is that, for example, when it comes to recommendations that are going to likely make it into the report about oversight, I think there's a diversity of opinion of what that should look like. And there are some really distinct and different proposals that that have been put forward, some of which the majority of the group is are going to pass as a motion. But that there are other people, like myself included, that don't I don't necessarily agree with that particular path. I think the thing that's challenging about it is I think we actually share a lot of very similar values and desired outcomes, and the mechanisms that people are recommending are not always something that I, for example, so I'll just speak for myself, can always get behind. If that makes any sense at all. I know that may seem a little bit vague. And so what I mean by minority voice is not the voices of people of color in this context. What I mean is that if multiple motions have been put forth, or people have multiple perspectives about what should happen, that we retain that multiplicity rather than cutting it down to only the things that, like, for example, had motions passed. Just because I do think there's a lot of other stuff on the table. And I definitely would not be the only one impacted by this. I think a lot of people have divergent views about how to get things done. And I think having all of them recorded would be useful and helpful, I guess.
Okay, I just, because I know after we did the community impact case, I had people talking with me about, you know, the people that were making the complaints against the police weren't necessarily representative of our entire community. And so, you know, sometimes there's a lot of pro-police people that don't feel like they're being heard. And so when you said minority views, I just kind of was trying to figure out, it's like, where that might, you know, fit into the whole thing. So thank you for clarifying. That makes more sense. When you were talking about the homeless discussion at the police commission, I know this has gone back and forth, but hasn't there been a time where Parks and Rec has done the movement of the unhoused and the homeless before, with the assistance of some community service providers? And then it went back to the police, or was that not discussed? It just seems like this kind of goes pendulum back and forth as to who's enforcing.
Yeah, I don't have a long enough memory to be able to give you a very good context. I don't know if any of the EPD reps want to tackle that one.
I just didn't know if it came up in conversation.
I mean, I think that my recollection is that at this point, EPD is there as like backup to the people who are doing the more direct interaction. And that sort of sounds like where it's settled for the most part, with Parks and Open Space doing the leading role. That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay, thanks. I kind of thought that's what it was, but I wasn't sure. So, and I don't have anything to say about the two little cases that were added on. So I guess that means Sergeant Nelson can go on his merry way to do his merry things.
I haven't had my turn yet, Bernadette.
Oh, sorry, Carolyn. I thought you
It's okay.
started.
But I agree. Ryan, thank you for coming. You are excused if you'd like to be.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I don't actually have any comment at all. So I think we can move on. This order that we just used is what we can use throughout it, and I'll pop it into the chat so we can pay attention to that. But that works, I think, to just do the same order but alternate who starts. Right. Okay. So minutes approval. Anything to adjust from the minutes from last month? I don't hear anything. So let's approve those minutes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
I second.
I see some thumbs up, so they are approved. And it is time for the first case review. And while Leah is going over that, I'll put our order in the chat.
Yes, okay. We'll get there, guys. You can see I was working on this earlier. Sorry. It's an exciting time. Okay. Okay, here we go. Thank you for your patience on that. All right, case summaries for this month. Case number one, oh, by the way, I should apologize for never fleshing out the agenda. So it just says case review at this point. I typically put a little something there, but yeah, sorry. So we're gonna do the taser one first. Officer A was on patrol downtown and heard someone screaming no, shouting obscenities outside of a bar. This was at night. I realized I maybe should have put that, but it wasn't like the middle of the day. Officer A turned their vehicle around. Were contacted by an employee of the bar who told the officer that the person had tried to force their way in and the bar wanted to trespass the person. Officer A saw someone who matched that description, got out of their vehicle, shouted at them to stop, at him to stop and sit. A couple times, you know, it wasn't just stop, sit, and then the rest of this happened, but it wasn't very long either. Officer A deployed their taser, striking the suspect who fell to the ground, then sort of popped back up, backed away from the officer, removed the taser wires, and there's back and forth happening verbally at this point. Officer A then deployed pepper spray, which did not affect the suspect, but kind of blew back at the officer, and the officer was affected and kind of doubled over. The suspect turned and ran away. Officer B then got there and saw Officer A kind of doubled over and then ran. And I think Officer A said, you know, the pepper spray got me kind of, and then Officer B chased the suspect and got them into custody after an additional taser deployment and a physical struggle. So Sergeant C completed a blue team report on the use of force, which concluded that it appeared to be within policy. A lieutenant came to the same conclusion, and then a captain looked at it and requested further review from defensive tactics. That review focused mostly on the second taser deployment by Officer B, and concluded that that was within policy. And then the captain remained concerned about the initial taser and the lack of de-escalation. So flagged it for our office, and this administrative review followed. So the two allegations were de-escalation, that Officer A used ineffective verbal communication and failed to attempt to de-escalate the encounter in violation of policy. And then a violation of the taser policy, that the deployment was not within policy. I made a table because I keep forgetting to actually update it when I do it the other way. So I hope this helps. And especially for this one, because there was some discrepancy. So the sergeant and lieutenant thought it was within policy. The captain and the deputy chief and myself thought it should be sustained, and the chief sustained. And I should say there's a little bit in my memo where, so this, I don't usually explain all of this, but anyway, the sergeant contacted me like the day I got back from Christmas vacation, and we talked for a while and I was like, yeah, that sounds fine. And then but I hadn't written it yet. I hadn't really actually reviewed the file or thought about it. So that's why in the sergeant's memo, it says, I talked to the deputy auditor and she agreed. And then the captain and the DC say the same thing. It's true. I did agree with both of them at different times, but ultimately I thought it should be the same. So sorry if that caused confusion in your review. And these are the issues that you guys typically discuss. So intake classification monitoring arose out of a routine use of force review, policies and practices, training, and then adjudication recommendations. I just kind of called out that there was some disagreement there. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so you guys can see each other, and then we'll come back for the second case review.
Muted. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're gonna just do our initial general review notes, and we'll start with Bill and then go to Rick. And do you all see in the chat the order? Okay.
Thanks,
So I
Karen.
don't have to call on people.
So I guess I'll start out with a couple questions, Leah. First was, is it common practice for the sergeant lieutenant to call the auditor's office to talk about this before they do their memo on what they think?
Yeah.
Charges?
Yes. So that's definitely part of it. So what happens is, I participate in the investigation, and then the investigation goes to the chain of command and back to me. And then I always talk to the supervisor about how we feel about the investigation and where it should go. Typically there's agreement there. When there's not, it usually ends up being the chief's call, but as you saw here, it is different. But yeah, that's what we usually do.
Okay.
Bill, just a second. I meant to say something before we started the discussion. I know that it might be really tempting to talk about Officer A's former employment that they had before they were an officer. And I just want to remind people that that would be an identifier. So we can refer to it not by name. Does that make sense to people? You can say what the job entailed, perhaps. Okay,
Thanks,
sorry,
Karen.
Bill.
I meant to do that. I forgot.
So I guess just my general comments. Thanks, Leah, for answering that, because it just it seems odd that you kind of catch you on a phone call like that instead of actually having a discussion about it. But this was an interesting case that to look at it, that the time it took him to deploy a use of force was very short, and he took more time, I think, to turn his car around and park it than he did before he decided to use force. And so I struggled a little bit with that. You needed to slow things down, but I say all that, but when you're dealing with somebody that is very intoxicated and isn't probably able to understand what you're telling them, a lot of it, and be able to de-escalate that's a very tough place. But I know you didn't give the time to see if that would work or not. But I do think that's something to think about, is how intoxicated this person appeared to be, and what he was doing prior to the officer getting out and looking at him. So I'll stop there.
I agree with Bill on that. I think that there's this perception that you can go out and be nice to people and they're going to comply. This fellow had no intention of doing anything that the officer wanted him to do, in my view. And I think it became really apparent after they got him on the ground in the parking structure. I was shocked by the guttural tone of his voice, and it was almost inhuman. It struck me that there was more going on than just alcohol, that there had to have been some drugs involved. I had no idea because we don't get the medical records, but I agree with Bill also that the Taser came out very quickly. there has to be a line that the officer has to walk between trying to get some compliance in a friendly way versus pulling the taser out immediately and letting fire with it. Essentially, there was no real warning that I'm going to use a taser. It was just stop on several occasions. And when the fellow would appear to be aggressive, I don't know whether he was trying to be aggressive or not. He probably doesn't know either at this point, but the taser came out fairly quickly. And I think no matter what, whether there was an attempt to de-escalate or not, there was still that force used without probably waiting long enough for it for any reasonable request to take place.
So I found this to be a little shocking, I guess. So I like to pay attention to how much time it takes between things. So the officer exits their vehicle at 1 minute and 50 seconds into the video. 7 seconds later, the taser is out. 19 seconds later, the taser, from when the officer exited vehicle, 19 seconds later, the taser is used. 43 seconds after the officer left the vehicle, the person has now been tased and pepper sprayed. And that's just a shockingly fast timeline to me. I guess the other thing that's interesting for me reading these things, this is just a general comment section. So I think it becomes interesting to me how people use language to characterize different things. So in the adjudication from lower down in the chain of command, I think the sergeant level, there's language like this. The person turned, faced Officer A, while posturing and balling his fists. These mannerisms are clear fight indicators and thus caused Officer A concern for their safety and the safety of the general public within the vicinity. I'm not saying that that's like necessarily inaccurate, but that I, as a person, that's not what I see when I watch the video. That's not how I would describe what I saw. What I see is someone who's definitely yelling, definitely somebody who looks sort of intoxicated, but I also see someone who doesn't understand why the officer's talking to them at all. The person keeps mentioning, like, I'm crossing on the light. Like, the person was in the middle of the crosswalk when the officer stopped their vehicle and jumped out and almost immediately tased them. And definitely the person was saying, no, I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do. But the officer also never explained, other than saying, I mean, like the words that in this section were, stop as the officer's exiting the vehicle. Let's see, 10 seconds later, it's sit down on the curb. And then the person saying, no. The officer isn't saying you're under arrest. The officer isn't saying what the person has done wrong. Like, the person seemed to think for some period of time that the officer was stopping him for some kind of like jaywalking or something. Like, there was no communication at all other than, I'm giving you a lawful order and sit down on the curb, like with no preface whatsoever. And so that seems super problematic to me. I don't disagree that the person appeared to be very intoxicated, but I don't think that means that justifies that sort of rush to, I don't know, to inflict harm, physical pain to try to gain compliance. I mean, the other thing, there were no, like, right in the video that we could see, there weren't it wasn't like a crowded situation. There were not like a lot of other people around. You see a person yelling, walking across the sidewalk with the light, and no one else really around. So the imminent threat thing sort of seems to fall flat for me. And the person wasn't walking towards the officer. The person was constantly walking away from the officer. none of those, yeah. So anyway, my characterization of the situation would just be very different. The language I would use would be very different. And I was super upset by how quickly it unfolded and went from barking unclear or clear orders for an unclear reason and tasering and pepper spraying the person.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think that for me, with this case, the thing that was maybe, so we've talked in previous cases about how much we like seeing when officers will during their interviews, they'll say, yes, I realize that I was mistaken, and they'll sort of own up to something. In this case, where it seemed pretty clear to certainly the people above in the chain of command that something that there were violations of procedure. We have the officer just kind of saying, nope, I did not violate anything. Even like with not giving it the warning, like there was just this intent for post hoc justification that that was concerning, and certainly not what we've seen in the past in other cases from officers. So so that was I'll just add that.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to ask a question before I provide my comments. Can you explain to me what has to happen in terms of policy before an officer gives a lawful order and to get on the ground?
I'm going to ask Jason to take a crack at that if he's available. I think what I've seen is, I don't know, what I see in that is a lawful, like there's of course a legal definition that of course I don't have in my brain right now. But I can look it up pretty quick. But I think, I mean, what I generally look for is are you allowed to detain this person? Are you allowed to tell them to stop in this moment? Is there something going on here? I can look that up unless Jason unmutes. Jason?
I'm here. I'm not sure I have a better answer than you do, though. I'd have to look up the legal definition of that kind of stuff. But it would be typical if you're about to contact somebody that you think is going to be you need to stop them for any kind of investigative reason, and they're giving you some reason to believe they're hostile or they're going to be uncooperative. Particularly, it's commonplace for us to ask people to sit down or somehow try to restrict their movement while we figure things out. It's kind of common.
Thank you both. Okay, so a few comments. When I was reading the incident summary, I was reading the sentence that reads, Officer A told person to stop and that he was giving him a lawful order and to get on the ground. And I kept reading that sentence thinking that getting on the ground was the lawful order, but stop was the lawful order, right? If I'm to read that correctly.
I'm sorry, I think, so the stop and the sit down, I think were maybe what he was referring to, but which section are you in right now? I want to make sure I'm referring to the right thing.
I'm in the document that comes first in the packet, I believe.
The investigative report?
Use of force report.
Oh, that. Okay, got it. Sorry. All
I'm
right.
sorry.
Don't apologize. It's perfect. Yeah, so I want to just in general, I want to say that the use that part is from, so what happens is, and Jason can talk about this probably better than I can, but if there's a use of force, sergeant gets called to the scene after it happens, and the sergeant talks to the people involved. Sometimes they get a chance to watch the video, sometimes no. and they write just, there's supposed to be sort of a general summary to get an overall view. So that, I wanted to just be clear about the sort of low level of investigation that is done for a use of force report. And then I will try to find the right part, but my instinct is that the order is trying to get to assert control over the situation so that they can talk to this person to basically issue the trespass is sort of the idea. So the lawful order would be stop, sit down, whatever the officer thinks that they need to be doing to get that under control. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm sorry for the questions and framing necessary to get to my what I'm trying to get to is in the narrative section of the investigative report document. On page 3 of 12 at the bottom, the transcript reads, Taser deployed, stay down, and then the suspect saying, why do I need to sit down? And, you know, even though this is after all of that has happened, this is kind of what made me slow down in my reading of this and ask, like, okay, that's why I need to know, like, is there something that has to happen when an officer approaches? Because I think as others have mentioned, it felt fast to me, and I didn't know if an officer needs to identify why they are being asked to sit down, or if that's some information that needs to be provided before, say, you know, detaining or arresting somebody. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. And I'm trying to run through policy in my head, and I don't, there's nothing that, to my knowledge, and Jason again can jump in, but nothing to my knowledge that requires you to explain the order. But that's part of why de-escalation came into play when we were classifying this one, right? Because while and I can understand why there wouldn't necessarily be a policy saying you have to explain the order when asked, right? Because there's not always going to be time to do that. But when I look at it, if I see, like I think it was last month, we looked at the one where there was a performance one for not identifying themselves. They are actually required to identify themselves when asked. They weren't asked in that case. I just felt like it could have been helpful. And it's sort of similar here.
If you're talking about the case from last week, that's what I was going to say. That reminded me of where things are happening. It's at night. There was a dog, and you know, heart rates are elevated, and this one felt hasty to me in a similar way. Although I know it's not, like you said, the same thing, being asked to identify themselves. So that's what it comes down to for me. I appreciate Lindsay's comments, giving us like an actual timeline, which provides some, like, you know, material kind of context to this. So yeah, it felt really hasty to me.
So hasty seems to be the word that we use a lot recently when reviewing these cases. And I mean, it's hard because, you know, at what point is it too fast, and what can happen if they're too slow? I think that's what the officers are always having to, you know, look at. And in this case, we have somebody who has a significant history dealing with people with drug, alcohol, mental health issues outside of the department, and is very involved in de-escalation over the years. And we're saying that their judgment on the scene is being looked at and was too hasty. And it's sometimes challenging to tell somebody with so much experience that they could have done better. I mean, I think anybody that's, you know, it's easy to tell the people that are 5 years or less on the streets that they did something hasty and they could have done better, and we want them to learn from it. But this is somebody who has learned a lot over the years. And, you know, it's that debate between, you know, how much conversation, you know, do you have conversation to see if it will de-escalate? at the risk of it escalating. And I think this officer made the decision that the conversation was only going to escalate. And I think it's hard for me to see anything that would have escalated it, because in the very, very brief contact, there wasn't anything that seemed to change this person's mood in the context of the contact. So yeah, I mean, it's a troubling one in the sense of how quickly it happened. And it would have been nice to be able to see what it was that this officer saw that convinced them that there was not going to be any de-escalation. But I think in the absence of seeing anything that wouldn't de-escalate it, I think we need to see something that would have escalated it in order for it to move this quickly. And I think that's what's missing for me, is that something that would have shown me that just a couple more seconds would have escalated it. You know, obviously we don't want it to escalate significantly, but I think that's what I saw when I was looking at it and reading it, is that, you know, taking all of this into account and balance, there just had to be something that showed it, that slowing down would have made it worse. And I think that's what's missing for me, is it's, you know, that we needed something like that. I think that's it.
All right. A lot of good stuff here, y'all. I agree. I always do the timing too, Lindsay. I appreciate that. And I actually gave them 2 extra seconds because I started the count when they said, hey, stop, out the window before they got out. So even with that, it was 10 seconds between hey, stop and deployment of the taser. So the 2 seconds doesn't give them much, in my opinion. So my main thought about this is that in the taser use policy, point 4, it says a person who flees from arrest for a crime for which a person would normally be taken into custody in lieu of using another force option more likely to result in injury to the subject or officer. The fact that a person is fleeing should not be the sole justification for discharge of a taser. So I did want to ask Jason, is trespass something that you would typically take someone into custody, or is it typically like just a citation?
It really depends on the person. I mean, if you can gain cooperation from them and you think a citation is sufficient, that's the way it can go. If it's a super cooperative person, they might not get a citation at all. They just get a warning. But if it's somebody that's hostile or you think it's going to cause additional problems, then a custodial arrest will be what we'd normally do.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, well, I have thoughts on that. I think at the beginning of the interaction, there was nothing that would have indicated that this person, in my opinion, needed to be arrested. But I think because of the lack of de-escalation and the presence of the escalation, that kind of changed that. But I don't know that that should fall on the person's shoulders rather than the officers. So Bernadette, you said a citation is still custody.
Well, I mean, they have to take them into custody, even if they're going to write them a citation and let them go. So even though they may get a citation and be allowed to walk away with a trespass, they still have to take them into custody before they can give them that citation. So it doesn't really matter if they're going to give them a citation to walk away, or they're going to take them into custody, keep them in custody and take them to the jail. So I just want to clarify that, because I think some people think just giving them a citation is not taking them into custody. Go ahead, Leah. I know you want to say something.
Thank you, Bernadette. No, I think that the taser policy overall is a little bit confusing, and in that particular subsection, way down at the very end, it says, and the crime needs to be one of these. So it tries to delineate that it needs to be basically a violent crime in order for that to apply, which is, the language is meant to mirror the deadly force court sorry, case law. Oh my gosh, sorry. So just, yes, someone needs to be stopped and detained in order to receive their little ticket. And Bernadette is completely right, but I just wanted to say that the actually specific crimes that fleeing part applies to are listed later in the policy. Does that make sense?
It does. Would this be considered one of those crimes that falls under the felony or violent crime?
No,
Okay,
no,
I think that's my point.
yeah.
What I was seeing was, is this really worth it to do all this? Or if this one person gets away, is that gonna be a danger to our community? And my opinion was that this person getting away would not have affected my community or our community. They were leaving the trespass place.
Well, I think,
And-
based on the information the officer had at the time, which was trespass and trying to bust into the bar, but there was no, he didn't have knowledge of any assault on a person. No.
Right. And they were leaving.
Right.
They weren't trying to go back to the bar. Okay, that's all my thoughts on that. We're going to turn to complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. And we will do the same order, but we're going to start with Rick this time.
I thought the intake was fine. Another good investigation by Jason. On the intake, there is this kind of expressed fear in the community that has come out during this ad hoc committee process that there are a group of people that believe that the police do not police themselves. And it's almost an overriding issue with many people on the committee. And I think this is a good example of a situation where there was some disagreement in the lower levels of the command structure as to whether there was a violation of policy here. But because a captain decided, we got to take a look at this, it got looked at. And it got looked at with open eyes. And as a result, there was a finding that there was a policy violation. And it's been found by the chief apparently to go along with that. And so I think that this goes to show that on intake, the availability of the police as a source of inspection of these things is very valuable in our community. And it may not be in other communities, but people need to understand that it does work here.
That's an interesting comment, Rick. I don't necessarily disagree, but I think part of the reason why we've set ourselves up for it to work here to the extent that it does is that there are structures and processes in place that incentivize it. So for example, so we have good use of force reporting and like the whole blue team system. I mean, that's a structural thing that's in place that provides a level of transparency directly into the auditor's office, for example, and to the chain of command about what's going on. Those don't rely on people's goodwill or good intentions. Those are structural things that are in place. And that creates a system where I think we are more likely to have the type of transparency that we want. And I think that plays out in multiple ways. In this case, it sounds like this came in because through a review of routine use of force report, and then it was looked at more closely. But without those structures in place, without the civilian auditor in place, without blue team in place, without these processes in place, I don't think it naturally happens because police are really good at policing themselves. I think it happens because we've set up a structure that incentivizes the process to work correctly. I don't know if that makes sense exactly. I absolutely agree that these investigations are good and thorough, and that we've set up a system that makes it more likely that there is transparency all the way down to you and I, the people here who are allowed to see this stuff. So yeah. So I don't, yeah. I guess I'm sympathetic to the mistrust. And I think there are multiple different ways that we can work to improve that. And one of the ways is having robust systems that incentivize transparency, even if there are bad faith actors, right? If, I guess maybe is the way I would put it. I didn't have any problems with the intake or the investigation or the monitoring, as I have said here, as I said at Police Commission, as I've provided testimony at the ad hoc commission. It's not the transparency or the thoroughness of the investigations that give me any concern with the oversight process. That part of the process works for me. So thanks.
So I think I'm up next. Intake, classification, monitoring, investigation. I think that I am good with all of those. With this one, I don't know if it's the muscle relaxants or what, but it seems like there was a smaller font chosen this time around for the use of force report. I had a devil of a time reading that, so I object to the font size.
I'm not sure if I have any comments in this section. Yeah, other than, you know, it seems like the language in the de-escalation policy says that officers should make every reasonable effort to de-escalate confrontations to prevent the need to use force. And as a person with a subjective viewing of this, I just don't see that.
So I get what Rick is saying and I get what Lindsay is saying, and I agree with both of you. I think the blue team would not have come about had it not been for the police department saying, we want the blue team. So they took the steps to put in place a process or a structure that would find these situations and allow for an investigation, which also at the same time, we started to see more officers bringing cases forward and saying, we're seeing some things here we want somebody to look at beyond what was going on with blue team. So I think the structures brought forth officers doing the right thing, and so I think they go hand in hand. I think what Rick was referring to is that it was a captain that said, no, this is a violation of policy, when a sergeant had already said that it was not a violation of policy. So I think that, I mean, I think both of you are right. But I think that, yes, we have good people in IA doing really good, thorough reports. I think we have a lot of officers that are seeing things and bringing it up to their sergeants. We have the blue team that is finding things and putting things forward. And we have officers that are, admitting when they haven't done something right. Unfortunately, in this case, the officer is not thinking that they could have done something better. Not saying that they did it wrong. I mean, I think that there's a difference between saying somebody did something wrong and they could have done something better. Just like there's a difference between saying somebody is not guilty, but they're not necessarily innocent. Just like a citation is custody, detainment is not. So, I mean, words really matter in all of these discussions. And I think so much of the distrust and the communication that goes on is people not knowing the same definition of words. And the words that officers use have very clear meanings, and then it somehow is not understood necessarily by the community. And so I think the intake and classification is correct here. I think this is all part of that ongoing conversation that our community, you know, they want the police to police. They don't want them to do anything wrong, but they also sometimes don't know how to have conversations on seeing what they're doing and understanding what they're doing, because sometimes they're speaking different languages and using the same words. And I think that's part of what we're here for, is to try and figure out how do we make sure people understand that a citation in lieu of custody is still custody. And so you have to follow those lawful orders if you're in custody. That's all.
It's my turn. I think that everything was, I would think it was all good. The intake was good, the classification was good, the investigation was good, and the monitoring was good as usual. It's thorough, it was quick. And I know that it was done in a time that a lot of people and resources were going toward the community impact case. So while it looks like it maybe took a little bit longer than some, I think there's good reason for why it took longer than some, also with the holidays. So I think it was really good. I appreciate seeing it. And I appreciate the discussion about how it happened and how we got there. And to me at this point, I feel like it is part of a robust and successful system. So it doesn't really matter to me how or why the officers are reporting or seeing it. I appreciate that it's happening, and I appreciate that it goes to the IA and then to the auditor and then to us. And I think that I hear Rick's point that I think a lot of people in our community don't understand how robust and well done our system is. And I wish that more people in Eugene understood that. I think you see a lot about like national police forces not having any sort of oversight. And I think a lot of people just assume that it's probably the same here in Eugene, and they don't know that we have all of the things in place that we have. So I think it's good to have that conversation and get the historical knowledge of why we do it a certain way. So I appreciate that. Bill.
Thank you. So I appreciate everybody's comments. I do think, you know, as part of this, it's nice to see that the captain kept pushing when they didn't feel this was right, even though it initially was thought to have been within policy, and do that. And I think that what makes this department different than others is that they've embraced these changes long ago and continue to embrace them, which, as Carolyn said, I hate when we're put into the conversation about how these other police departments across the nation do this poorly when we do it so well. The one thing though I want to talk about a little bit, I think the investigation was great, but the classification, and I'm only saying this because as we go down this road, is that I hope the de-escalation policy doesn't become the catch-all for poor performance. Because when I watched this, as I said in the beginning, is that the officer just got out, commanded, tased. If he didn't use a taser, if he would have hit him with a nightstick, all that still would have been wrong, because I don't think it gotten to that level. But I do have a little bit of trouble with this one, with the de-escalation policy, because of the background of the officer, that maybe there was something that in his past or that he's been involved with the subject with these same sort of characteristics of being intoxicated to this level, that he knew that having a conversation was not going to work for him. I still don't think tasing him was right. I agree with that, but I want us to be careful about that de-escalation as being, there's a time that everybody has to talk to people, because I think that could lead us down a path that is not being fair to to the situations. So, thank you.
All right, that was everybody, right? Keep me honest here. Okay, Lindsay, you're gonna start the next round, and it's about EPD policies, practices, and training.
Mm, I think, I mean, I'm a broken record with the comment. I think we need to continue to pursue the active move towards the kinds of skills that we'd like to see, and that just measuring hours of training in things like de-escalation is clearly not necessarily leading to the outcomes that we would desire to see. So for whatever it's worth, I would like to continue to advocate for more proactive approaches to identifying people who are successful at de-escalation, making sure that they're retained, promoted, that they're the kind of people who are training other officers. And de-escalation isn't the only issue, but it's a big one. And I continue to be confronted with evidence that we're not terribly skilled at it. So that's all I have to say on that topic.
So, I'm actually glad. I said something like this before. That I'm glad to see that de-escalation is showing up as something that we're seeing. I think that there's the certainly my impression was that it was something that was we were not going to see very often, and so it's been reassuring to me that is a policy that's being taken seriously, as having some force to it, so to speak. I would say that so I was actually ready as I was reading this. I found myself ready at a certain point to accept that because of the officer's background, because of in terms of prior experiences, that this was a call that I was not going to second guess them on. It was really because the higher ups in the chain of command seemed so clearly troubled by it that I was sort of caused to begin to question my willingness to let this stand. And yeah, so I think that I'm sympathetic to wanting to defer to this officer's experience, but with that sort of sense then that this was so clearly troubling to people in EPD, that's what made me go back to that interview and think, this is someone who must know that they have violated the policy, but is just going to refuse to admit it. And it really did seem like I come back to the verbal warning. There was definitely not a verbal warning. There was no question about whether there was a verbal warning given, and yet the officer says, "I didn't violate the policy that requires me to give a verbal warning," and there just seems to be an unwillingness there to admit to wrongdoing, and I understand that from a human perspective. I think we have a scenario where they're frustrated because, right, there's so much going on. They don't have sight of the person they're trying to get. They're trying to find them. They're feeling like they've lost time with the car and the this and the that, and then those are the kinds of heightened stress factors that lead someone to mess up. And that's what happened. And no one wants to admit that. But I'm glad that this was caught by the people reviewing the use of force report.
Yeah, I want to respond to a few comments. First, I want to respond directly to Bill and say that I'm sympathetic of um, the need to be aware of the possibility for say some kind of selection bias when thinking about de-escalation, and when de-escalation is kind of a floating signifier and like local and national consciousness, right? So I hear you on that, and I think that that's important, and I think that that's the best kind of defense I think we have against that is to foster the ability for us to disagree, and I tend to think that and hope that when we get back together in person in the undefined future, that seeing people in person requires a different kind of engagement. And I look forward to joining you in cultivating that. Okay, let's be careful about selection bias. So I appreciate that. I think what Lindsay's saying also makes sense to me in thinking about, okay, how do we positively reinforce this kind of behavior that we want to see, de-escalation. Working with very small children, at least in my worldview right now, nothing else seems to work but positive reinforcement. And I don't mean to like infantilize the scenario, but I think that like if the community feels a certain way, right, telling them that they aren't understanding or speaking the wrong language, it doesn't change their perception of policing, whether it's right or wrong. I think that like doing things like creating an award, if something like that doesn't exist already, for like active de-escalation, I like that kind of stuff. I think that that is good for people's morale, and like it's good optics, and smaller things like that in terms of policy or procedure or structural engagement can go a long way in could go a long way in encouraging the behaviors that we want to see from officers, as well as showing the public that again, whether they're right or wrong, that this is something that we are trying to get good at and normalize. So create awards, they make people feel good.
So I'm not ready to say that this officer is not the person that should be teaching de-escalation because of this incident. And not that you said that, Lindsay, but that's kind of what came to my mind when you say that, we need to be looking for people that are doing the training to really, have the best people out there at de-escalation. And I think everybody who does de-escalation at one point in time thinks, oh, I wish I had tried this tact rather than that tact. And probably aren't in situations where they were caught in the situation, scene, and then had a review, as this officer was. And so is the officer being defensive and standing their ground that they did the right thing? It's what it would appear to us. Are there moments of self-reflection that they could have done it differently and therefore done it better? One would hope so. But as far as the policies and training, I don't see anything. I don't see a takeaway from this case that says anything needs to be done differently. I think what would be interesting is to know what the de-escalation trainers with EPD would have said with regards to this. Our society doesn't have conversations very well. People, get in their position and they hold their position. But I think a conversation between two people with various backgrounds of de-escalation training, taking this and discussing it, what the takeaway would have been for this officer, if anything. Because I think it's one of those things that it's always easy for us to look at the videos, which are a very distinct capture of the situation from one perspective that doesn't bring other things into account. And so we're being asked, rightfully so, to look at these and say, how else could it have been done, and could it have been done better? But I think we also have to always remember that human element, which is it's these dynamic situations, other things going on, and the officers are using their background and training to do the best they can when they're out there. And so it's why I wouldn't say that this was a de-escalation success, but I think there's probably a lot of de-escalation successes by this officer. And if we're going to say that, there should be awards out there for de-escalation successes, this officer could just as easily be getting one or many of them that we just don't know about. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that, all police officers are humans. So I think that they are allowed to make mistakes. And I would think that out of the whole EPD, this would be a person who would be highly trained and highly effective at de-escalation. So I think it's important to not just, push this one under the rug, sweep this one under the rug, because we know, I'm just assuming here, like, this person's good at it, so just this one off is okay, we can ignore it. I think it's good that we're still talking about it, even though I'm assuming again that this person doesn't have a bunch of these allegations under their belt. So I think it's good. Yeah, I think that's it. It's good to talk about it. But I don't know that this person in particular needs more training. I don't think that's the answer to this quandary.
I don't really have much to add. I think the policy on both of these are clear, and the practices, and I think the training, I think de-escalation is just something that has to be looked at. I think we've had, as everybody pointed out, it's two different people that are teaching de-escalation could, look at this thing and say it should have been handled two different ways. But I just think it's an ongoing conversation. And somehow if we could continue to have them do peer reviews where they could talk through these things and say, maybe you should try this next time or that next time, I think would be very helpful.
I would agree. I think that it's important to have de-escalation as in the background, and for every officer to be thinking about it at all times. But you can have the same training. Two people can do the same attempt at de-escalation using their own words that come to them naturally. And both of them could have a different result depending on what the individual that they're dealing with is doing at the time. I think you could probably take this particular suspect in this case and had two different results happen with no different training and no different approach, because you just don't know what was going through this person's mind, and you don't know what would work at any given time. So I think so long as we're keeping on top of it, so long as the training people are on top of it and keeping it in the forefront of people's minds, it's going to work.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what you had to say, Bernadette. And I didn't mean to say that this person shouldn't be a trainer or whatever. I think more what I meant to say was that I think there are ways we can systematically identify people who are often de-escalating well. And relying on a complaint-based system like this, which is only identifying when it doesn't go right, isn't the way to find those people. That's what I meant to say. I meant it creates a hole in the data as opposed to a point in the data. So I think we need to continue to lean into figuring out, because you are absolutely right. This person maybe like 99 out of 100 times de-escalated amazingly, and this was not an example, but we should and can systematically review that. And just relying on complaints to figure that stuff out is not, and just relying on complaints isn't the way to figure it out, and just relying on hours of training and experience as is clear from this case, is also not necessarily the best way to figure it out. So I just, there's something else. And I think, I think it's worth moving that way.
All right, Michael. Oh, Leah.
Can I? Or is it, I thought we'd gone through everybody. No, Michael.
We have gone through everybody. Yeah. We
Okay.
went through everyone.
Okay. No, Michael?
What are we?
He's going to start the next round. Lindsay started this round.
Okay. I'll be quick, I promise. Just it seemed to fit in here. I've had a lot of discussions with the deputy chief. There are a couple of taser usages coming down the pike, just so you all know. Related, the department is doing a lot of training on taser use right now. So I think my understanding is there's been a focus on that and making sure that the taser usage is in compliance with the Ninth Circuit law, which is pretty restrictive and makes clear that tasers are a higher level of force than focus blows and things like that. So just wanted to give that little update. One thing I wanted to note was I think the department is getting back to this. For a long time, they tracked taser display effectiveness and taser admonishment effectiveness. And those were actually both very, very high. So I agree that this all went very fast, obviously. I agree with that. But I just wanted to note that for when the officer got out of the vehicle and displayed their taser, that's a super low level of force that usually is very effective. So just displaying it, I think I think that's usually a really good choice. The problem for me is that I feel like for officers, often once it's out, it's sort of like your brain is stuck on that tool, and it's not always good to, it's as we see here, it's not always okay to deploy it. And then, yeah, I mean, you guys all were talking about de-escalation. The one thing I wanted to say is, it's interesting, and I'm interested to get your feedback as we go through these cases that are coming along, because I think it's very easy for me to consider de-escalation allegations when there's a use of force that I'm not sure had to happen. But at the same time, I don't think it's always the right one, because I think with use of force, there's a whole lot of case law. There's a whole lot of history on what I'm allowed to look at and when. And with de-escalation, it becomes a bit more fuzzy, and I do a lot of second guessing, and I find myself doing the Monday morning quarterbacking, and I don't think that's fair. So I'm very interested to get your feedback as we go along with all of that. And then that was it, I think. Okay, thanks. Michael.
Yeah, we're going to start the adjudication recommendations with Michael.
Okay.
Thanks, Leah.
I didn't realize that I missed training and not said anything, but I think that I would say that kind of, I guess Leah kind of already moved in this direction, but I was going to say that the I just wanted to stress that there were two allegations that were both sustained in this case, and only one of them was de-escalation. The other was the Taser policy, and it just seemed to me that it's not just about de-escalation. There were multiple issues here, and I don't think the de-escalation was the most serious one for me. That said, now is adjudication. All right, I agree with both, with the sustaining of them. Over.
Roger that. Yeah, I want to just briefly respond to what Leah said here, and I hadn't considered. I appreciate this perspective, which brings complexity to this for me. That there are cases when low-level uses of force can and should be read as de-escalation. So I appreciate learning that, and adding that to the way that I read these cases, because it's not something that I had computed with my low-level functioning COVID brain kind of approach we're bringing here. So that said, I agree, sustain on both accounts.
I agree with sustained on both counts.
I also agree with sustained on both counts.
I agree too.
I agree.
I agree. And I also, Leah, appreciate your transparency in clarifying in the sergeant's adjudication memo, kind of like what happened there. Because I wrote in there like, really? Seems odd. And so I just, because we all, I don't know, it wasn't like a big mistake or anything, but it's just, I appreciate how transparent that whole process was, right? That makes me super happy. So thank you for doing your work in the open, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindsay.
All right, it is time for a break. 5 minutes. So my clock says 6:56. Let's come back at 7:02.
Okay.
I put the order back in the chat just so it's like, I don't know if it disappeared for people, but Leah, do you want to go ahead and do the case review?
Yes, of course I do. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, case number 2. Constitutional rights arrests case. Here we had Officer A and Officer B. They were dispatched to a report of violation of a stalking order. They contacted the alleged victim, who provided them with a copy of a document that at the title said stipulated order of no contact and dismissal of stalking protective order, that named the victim and the person who she alleged had violated the stalking order. So just context. Officer A noted in their administrative interview later that the document was unserved and not signed by a judge. Officer A and Officer B then went to the residence of the alleged suspect, who was, like I said, listed as respondent on the document. Officer B asked the suspect to step outside. When she hesitated, Officer B stated she was under arrest, placed her in handcuffs. After they investigated the incident further, officers determined there was no probable cause for the arrest, and she was taken out of custody. Officer B coached Officer A after the call, and their supervisor entered the incident into blue team. So this happened after that. So the allegations were, so Officer B is the recruit, that Officer B placed the suspect under arrest without a valid warrant or probable cause to support an arrest. Officer A, that Officer A failed to prevent that, and specifically then caused an unconstitutional arrest. And then unsatisfactory performance, that Officer A didn't perform the required tasks as an FTO when they didn't adequately supervise Officer B. And then finally, that they also had inadequate performance when they didn't review the document sufficiently before contacting the suspect. Sorry, words are hard. Okay, everyone agreed on all of them on this one, that these should be sustained. So intake classification monitoring, again, this arose out of a supervisor review. And then the relevant department policies, I put the 2 policies there that were violated. And then I also just threw the field training program in there because it seemed like that might be something you all want to talk about. And then everybody agreed on the adjudications. So that's it. Oh, that's our office. Remember our office? You've been there. Okay, I'll stop sharing.
All right, we are going to start with Jose talking about just general thoughts.
I think this is the first case for me so far in which I have seen both of these allegations. So without having precedent for discussing them and thinking through them, my reaction was that this seemed like somehow a serious kind of structural failure. And I'm just looking to hear other people's comments before I make some more, and how we're talking about these specific allegations. What I feel comfortable saying is that what concerned me was that I don't remember which officer was assigned A or B, so I'm going to say an officer did not appear to recognize any mistakes being made in the case. That was something that immediately stood out to me, and I would like to hear people discuss and respond more to.
So I think this is, I might need Sergeant Williams to kind of jump in here, because I know this is one of those things where EPD has recruits that, I guess we're calling them a zero recruit because they haven't done the state academy. But they're going to do some time in the car with people before they go to the academy. So Sergeant Williams, can you explain at least a little bit more about what the timeline is for the shortest amount of time a zero recruit might happen, the longest time, what training they get before they are out there as a zero recruit, so I can better understand this?
Yeah, it's kind of a trying to figure out how to work in a new system for training. And new, I mean like new in the last 8 to 10 years, new since I got hired. When I got hired, we would do a big hiring process, and then we would run our own academy in-house here. And so you would immediately get hired and you would immediately start the in-house Eugene Police State Academy. And we actually trained recruits from other police agencies also. We were accredited through the state to run our own academy here. And so there was a nice flow where you go right through the full academy, and then you'd get cut into field training. You'd go through your 4 phases of field training and hopefully get cut loose and put out on the street. What's happened now is our hiring doesn't always align with when the academy is offering in a recruit class, or when they offer us seats in a recruit class. And we're at the mercy of the state academy for both of those things. When they actually run a process, and then which ones they have seats for us to be in. And so it's not uncommon to have a hiring process and then have it be some time until that recruit can go to the academy. And so that became the zero phase. So when they're hired with us, they start employment with the city of Eugene, and we don't want them to go somewhere else. And it is an opportunity for us to give them experience. So we put them through a pre-academy where they get firearm certified, and well, I don't know. It's several weeks worth of basic, very basic, and the basic certifications for use of force and the tools that we have. Over the last few years, we've tried different things where we've had them in plain clothes, we've had them in uniform. We've done different things, try to figure out what the best system is there. And the last few years, we've had them in uniform doing generally much less work, but still being along and being part of the process, and really using it as a field training opportunity. Well, unfortunately, due to COVID in particular, we had some that stretched into months and months and months, where they were months and months and months into zero phase. And I don't remember exactly how long this one had been, but this year in particular was a little unusual. I would say it's not uncommon, wouldn't be uncommon for a few weeks up to 1 to 2 months for somebody to be in zero phase. But this last year was certainly more peculiar in that respect. And so it's really up to the FTOs to evaluate the person that's with them, to determine what level of capability they have, and allowing them to take on more and more responsibility based on the experiences that they've already had, and their who they are, how good they're picking things up, while also still being there right there in the middle of it in order to pick up the pieces and redirect and correct, just like the FTO is in any circumstance. So that's where the zero phase came from, and that's where there's a lot of gray area in how much responsibility the recruits should or are allowed to have where a typical zero phase that's coming right to them is going to be sitting in the passenger seat and doing basically nothing other than just watching and maybe helping fill out paperwork and stuff. But they certainly progress far beyond that based on the time they're in.
And would they only be with one field training officer during that? I mean, is that preferential to having more than one field training officer?
No, they still cycle through different FTOs. It seems like well, and I don't know for sure, but we typically don't leave a recruit with an officer for more than 4 or 5 weeks. And then they transition to a new FTO. And that's really important so that they see different people, so that different FTOs that have different skills and weaknesses are evaluating different components of the recruits. You gain a lot by seeing how other people do police work, and we all do it differently. I mean, the rules are the same, but the way we get to the rules and apply the rules and the way we do stuff is different. We all have different styles and techniques and different interests. So like when I was in field training, my first coach was actually Captain Klinko, now Captain Klinko. And we were on a busy day shift doing report calls and stuff. And they recommended that I go to a night shift to an officer who was specifically known for doing lots of self-initiated activity, lots of drug work, so that I could get more experience doing self-initiated type things. So we try to design the flow of who they get based on what their skills are or interests or what their weaknesses are, and try to help fill the gaps and kind of design their training specifically for each recruit.
Okay, so obviously none of that was in here, but I thought it was important because it's like, well, I knew some of that from my previous time on the auditor's office when there used to be the police academy, obviously not all of it. I guess my biggest concern with all of this is, you know, we're asking somebody who is hired but not really trained, and certainly doesn't have the number of hours of law training that officers get with regards to what is probable cause, what are the basis to make an arrest, what's the basis to detain somebody. It just, again, we don't have, you know, this officer has gone through the enough legal training that the officers get with regards to all of those things to expect the officer to be able to have a judgment and do the right thing here. I think one of the questions that really confused me a lot is it was said in several people's notes that, I think this might be Leah's report, if I remember correctly, where it was said, no, I guess it's not, but it says there was no probable cause to believe that the person committed a crime. And what I didn't understand, that the information was insufficient to support an arrest. And so if there is a stalking protective order, so somebody is not supposed to have contact with somebody, and somebody says they had contact with me, that's a violation of the stalking protective order. But they're saying, but there were notes in here were saying that there wasn't a basis to make an arrest. And that's what I don't understand. It's like, if the person who, I mean, let's get away from the paperwork that they gave him that said it was all getting dismissed because it wasn't signed. So if they know there's a valid stalking protective order in place, and the person protected by that stalking protective order says that person who's not supposed to have contact with me had contact with me, isn't that the basis for an arrest?
So there was no valid stalking order.
There was, and then it was dismissed. But they had information at one point in time that there was a stalking protective order, that it got emailed to them. And then they found out a day or two later that it had been dismissed.
So Kyle may remember this more clearly than I do because I'm still remembering it, but they were given a piece of paper that said dismissal of stalking order. You're right. It was
Out on the street.
No.
Yeah.
There was something that was emailed to
Yeah,
them from the
Bern-
sheriff's office.
Bernadette's correct.
Okay.
She handed them what was the dismissal, which they missed. The stalking order was sent to them, and the county had made a mistake and didn't file the paperwork properly. And it was a day or day and a half later that the recruit was doing some follow-up and called over to the county, and they had to double check and triple check. And then they finally discovered that they in fact had screwed up and didn't have the stalking order rescinded as it should have been.
Okay, so on the night of this incident, officers believe that there's a valid stalking order in place. They believe that the stalking order was violated by this person going and having contact, and they take her out of the home and arrest her.
So there was nothing, all they did was talk to the complainant. That was it. Sorry, I'm remembering.
Right.
But so yes, someone said, oh, this person totally violated the stalking order, but they didn't know if the person had actually been there. They didn't know if that person had left their house. They didn't know any of that. They had that
But
person.
isn't that what every criminal case starts at, is they violated the law?
Yeah, and then you
So they
investigate.
have a stalking protective order, and that's supposed to protect them. That person had contact with them. There's arrests on that all the time. So what I don't understand is why all of a sudden, after they've arrested her, did they decide there was no longer probable cause? That's where I get really confused by this, because they believe they had probable cause because there was a stalking protective order and she violated it. And so they arrested her. And then at some point in time, they have a conversation that says there's no longer probable cause. So anyway, sorry, these are my previous thoughts, and maybe somebody else can see that and explain it to me, Rick. But I just didn't understand how they had probable cause and what the trigger was for them to say they didn't have probable cause until like 2 days later, when there wasn't a stalking protective order. I'm not going to say anything else right now.
Can I add a little food for thought in there to mix in? Just with stalking orders in general, they have very specific requirements. It's not uncommon for me to read reports where somebody makes an allegation and then an officer investigates it, and showing up, if the suspect had said, nope, I don't want to talk to you, they could have made an arrest. But by talking to the suspect, they actually realize that there's room in between the very specific components in it, and that there really actually is not probable cause. And there was enough doubt sown in this case based on the other half's testimony and some of the weird nuances of those specific lines that I think that's where that came to be. And it's not uncommon on our end for me to approve those. I've seen several in the last week that are just like that, where somebody makes an allegation of a violation of a stalking order and it's close, but it just doesn't quite, we just don't quite get there once the full picture is reviewed and whatnot. So with that, I will mute and I'm going to disappear unless you have anything else for me.
I'm always intimidated by these constitutional questions. And I think that I don't have anything to say at this point, but I do appreciate the robust discussion that is happening, and I'm interested to hear more.
So I won't get into the constitutionality, because it's great to have somebody like Bernadette and Rick on here that can talk to and look at those. But I guess in general, a couple things that really stuck out to me in this, and it's one thing that I've always kind of talked to the department about, the various chiefs that I've known, is that, and it's even more disappointing to see a field training officer not do it, but if you see somebody doing something that is questionable, another officer, like when he went right and arrested her as she was standing in her doorway before he really even talked to her. It seems like the senior officer should say, well, let's take a step back. She's cooperative. She's talking to us. There's no reason to go and handcuff her and do this at this moment. in time, at least what I could see on that. And it's disappointing to me that he didn't do that. He didn't stop that process and take a step back and say, you know, let's talk to her. Wasn't like she was fighting. Wasn't like she was saying, I'm not talking to you. She was asking questions. And I take this a step further because I wish other officers, even not in the training scenario, if they see somebody doing something, that they step in and go, well, you know, wait, let's take a minute. Let's before you go take this next step that may escalate this issue. I wish we could do more of that. That's it.
Okay, I think Bernadette is technically correct that if you have a complaining witness who can give you the basis for a reasonable belief that a crime has been committed, then you have probably the amount of evidence necessary to formulate a arrest based on a crime that you know has been committed. The two of them, however, had a talk, as I understand it, on the way over to pick them up, in which they decided that they would just talk to her. So there must have been something going on in what they picked up from the complaining witness, in how that individual expressed themselves to them, or there's had to be a credibility issue that was bothering them, that they decided they'd talk to the person that's being charged and to get her side of the story, that person's side of the story, sorry. Rather than doing that, however, the officer arrested that individual right away. And then it seemed like a kind of a phonied up excuse about being concerned about the bother being a danger to them and officer safety. And I just didn't buy that. I'm sorry to say, I didn't buy that at all. It struck me that they made a mistake when they allowed the officer to make the arrest without talking to her and giving them the basis for concluding that they didn't have probable cause, which is what they did eventually after they talked to her and let her loose. You have a problem here when you have Lane County Sheriff's Office and NCIS has the wrong record on record. There was a clerical error made, and when they asked for the record, they got a confirmation that there was a stalking order in effect. The no contact order, which was plain as day on the face of, apparently plain as day, because we don't have a copy of the document, something I want to take up when we go on. But it should have been plain as day that this was a dismissal of the stalking order and a no contact order, which is a civil agreement between the parties. The consequences of violation of which is a civil matter, not something that is a criminal matter that would be subject to arrest. The stalking order is a criminal issue. The no contact order is not. And so it struck me that both of them read that document in the complaining person's apartment, and it looked like their eyes glazed over a bit. It didn't look like they really understood what they were looking about. And after they read it and everything transpired, the excuse was given, well, it wasn't signed by the judge and it was just a copy. And, you know, the woman told him that the copy was provided by that complaining witness's lawyer. And it's typical in a situation like that where the lawyer obtains some sort of an agreement for a client, they'll send them a copy that has not been signed yet by the judge. That's just a typical deal. And going back to what Bernadette said about the training that needs to be given to these folks on law, at least the rookie officer didn't have that background to fall on. He probably didn't know what the difference was in the first place. And the training officer really had the duty to look at it more carefully and make certain that the officer that was in training did not make any arrest until such time they had an opportunity to talk to him. That's my analysis of it. I may be completely wrong, but I think that all of you have pointed out some good ideas.
So I thank you all. I agree with Bill's comments and I really appreciated them. Thank you, Bernadette, for bringing that up. That's super helpful to have this discussion. So I understand more about this. I know nothing about stalking orders and no contact orders and what kind of documentation. So this is good learning experience. Rick, I love how hard you are trying to work on gender neutral pronouns. And I just want to acknowledge it is so hard and you are doing great. So thank you.
I've been speaking this way for 70 years.
I know, and I'm not hassling you. I'm genuinely, I'm saying it's hard.
I apologize ahead of time, but that's just too bad.
You know, you're doing great. I'm not hassling you. You're doing, it's hard to learn new things and I appreciate that we're all doing that together. Okay. So basically my only comments to add to this were just that it's not particularly surprising that someone called a zero phase officer would make an error. That is not surprising. That seems reasonable. I'd prefer them not to violate people's constitutional rights. I'm not excusing that, but I'm saying that's not surprising. It's more disappointing that the field training officer not only didn't rectify the situation, but then even after, even in the interview process, isn't willing to acknowledge. So I guess, Michael, I would kind of kick this to you as you move forward in your police commission role. The field training officer program is something that I've brought up that I have concerns with in general. I really would like police commission to get into looking at that program, how field training officers themselves are supervised, how they're evaluated, how they're chosen. This is not like the first time we've seen less than stellar performance by an FTO, unfortunately. So I think that's something that's just kind of going to be a continual need. And that's it.
Okay, yeah, wow, it's weird going last. There's like so much on the table. So the thing that troubled me in this case was I feel conflicted over the sustained allegation against the zero program, zero something, the zero person.
Phase
That's
zero.
something. Phase zero. Thank you. The phase zero recruit, because I know that when the closest I get to being a field training officer is when I'm supervising graduate student teachers, and if they make an error in grading something, that because I gave them poor instructions on on what the expectations were for grading this, that's my fault. I mean, that is not their fault. And it seems to me like the reason we have the field training officer is so that that person will stop someone who has no experience or almost no experience, almost no knowledge. We'll stop them from making this kind of mistake. And so I feel much more comfortable with the allegations against the field training officer. It feels a little unfair almost to me to be holding the phase zero trainee responsible for something that how do we expect them to be responsible? People have said this, but I just feel like the big problem here is with the field training officer. As far as the and so yeah, they did clearly decide even before they knew that the stalking order had been rescinded and there was a mistake in Lane County Sheriff's Office. Even before they discovered that, they'd already made the decision there was no probable cause, right? So they this is in one of the sergeant's adjudication memos that they stated they believed they had probable cause to arrest the person based on the other person's statements alone, even prior to talking to them to get their side of the story. Upon contact with them, they told them they were under arrest and handcuffed them. But then after additional interviews on scene, right, within like 20 minutes, right? They decided that probable cause did not exist, and subsequently took them out of the handcuffs. So I feel like the issue, the clerical issue, is definitely of concern, even though it's outside of our purview. But it was apparently apparent to the officer, at least the FTO, even before that was sorted out, that that a mistake had been made, that they did not have probable cause. That's why they let them go. And so, yeah, I'm not so much. I mean, I am bothered about the clerical error, but I feel like it's a bit of a side issue in this, although deeply concerning. But it did leave me with another question, though, which is just, so what is the standard position when an officer is acting on bad information, but has no reason to know that the information is bad? Would that, what would we be doing then?
We probably wouldn't be here. Oh, Rick, you do it. Rick.
In 1979 or so, I defended a Springfield police officer who arrested somebody on an arrest warrant. The person was taken to jail and spent overnight at least there. And they filed a lawsuit against the cop. And we found out that there was an arrest warrant, but it had been canceled. But it did not make its way into the clerical system. And when the officer called in, they reported to him that there was an arrest warrant for the person. He had stopped them on the grounds of some traffic charge or something. He called in the name. They found out that there was a clerical error, that there was a warrant issued according to the NCIS records. And when we took that to the jury cut the officer loose, said that he was relying upon what he thought was valid records, and the jury felt that he had probable cause to make the arrest, even though there had been, more than just a 10-minute handcuffing. So I think the officer has the right to rely on that. Whether the city would or the county would, if they're named as a defendant, is not likely. So there are a couple levels there. It depends on who's named as a defendant.
Yeah, just not to jump on, but we had a case oh God, it might've been 10 years ago, but there was an officer who pulled over, did basically a high-risk traffic stop because the car was reported stolen, and it was the wrong license plate that was reported stolen. So it was, not pleasant for anyone, but we didn't hold the officer accountable for that. It was very much a clerical problem, right? I did want to talk really quickly, if I could, because that was something I wrestled with, the whole phase 0 versus training officer and who is more culpable here. And may or may not have a case coming up where something similar happens. And to me, it was, in this case, it sort of seemed like, the recruit officer took this action very much on their own volition. There was this discussion in the car where I think it sounded like the training officer had an idea that the arrest wasn't going to happen, and then the recruit kind of just jumped in and did it. Whereas if the recruit had said, hey, are we arresting now? Not necessarily verbally even, but if there had been a check-in and the FTO had said, yes, do it, I don't think I'd be holding that recruit accountable, because they're doing exactly what they've been told to do. And in this case, it seemed like there was one plan, and then the recruit went off a different direction with their own judgment. So that was my thought process. But I'm here for critique, as Bernadette knows.
Maybe Jose wants to say something now that we've had our discussions, because he said he wasn't ready to talk.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Bernadette. Thank you. I would like to just, as I'm learning here, I would like to ask if in page 7, titled an interview with Officer A in the investigative report document, page 7, interview with Officer A. Paragraph 5, sentence number 2. It reads, Officer A advised they noted the document they provided to them did not have a service date and was not signed by a judge. Officer A told them they did not notice the document was not in fact a stalking order, but advised that since they was not relying on the document for the case, they did not look at the details. Did anything that we discussed change that? I think that's what was that was the kind of framing for or the comment that I made at the beginning was kind of in framing my question about this.
Mhm.
So I'm open to explanations and learning here.
Well, I think, and if again, this is somewhat relying on my memory, which as we all know is faulty, but I believe that officer was referring to the fact that they would be checking with records with LCSO to see what was actually on file, regardless of whatever paper was in front of them, is what I think they meant. So I don't know that it changes anything that we just discussed. Does that make sense? Okay. I didn't mean to shut you down at all. I hope I didn't. I was trying to answer as best I could.
No, I was thinking, you know, as folks were discussing, well, did they know this? Did they not know this? Did the discussion change anything that those sentences say? Because that to me is what this hinges on, the latter allegations of unsatisfactory performance hinge on, to me at least.
Well, I'd be interested to hear from Rick and Bernadette and see what they think about that, because I think we all know what I wrote, right?
I think that the lack of attention to looking at the document that was presented by the first person, I think was kind of, I mean, the first part where it was kind of like they had the opportunity to basically ask more questions about that document. The fact that it was signed or unsigned didn't matter to me because, I mean, like Rick said, that people get copies of documents that are not signed, you know, and it's because they're easier to forward and they just, you know, say, here's a copy of the document. The judge is going to sign it today, or the judge already signed it. And so that paragraph doesn't mean much to me in the sense of this case, except that they should have read. I mean, it's like the title of it itself was enough to raise, or should have, given that this officer has, well, only 3 years with Eugene Police, 17 years someplace else. Those things combined with made me think they should have seen these sorts of documents before and recognized that the title meant something. And they should have slowed down and said, wait a minute, we've got something coming from the sheriff's office that says there is a valid document in place, but then the person who wants to get somebody arrested is giving me a document that shows they shouldn't even be arrested because it's getting dismissed. And so that's where, you know, it's like, it's pretty wonky for me, to use a legal phrase.
Did that answer questions? Are we ready to move on? Okay. Bernadette, you can start us off on complaint intake, classification, investigation, monitoring, please.
I think it's fine. I think all the things that we needed to know don't make sense to put in here. I mean, like all the questions I asked at the beginning about, you know, this zero recruit thing, you know, in a year without COVID going on, the zero recruit thing might only last a couple of weeks, and we would never see something like this happening because they would basically just be doing a long glorified 2-week ride along with an officer before they went up to get their training. So I think it's I think the investigation and the classification were correct. I'm leaning against, while I understand the point of view with regards to the recruit, I just don't, I guess knowledge of the law is not an excuse if you break the law. But when it comes to job performance, it's a little bit different. I think there's an expectation that you have been trained in your job to do the things that your job is requiring you to do. And so if somebody isn't trained to do the right thing to arrest somebody, can we fault them for arresting them? So I'm just putting out there that I'm leaning against sustaining the allegation against the recruit here.
And that's an important question. And I think I appreciate that the recruit did have the did have the things against them, the allegations, just because I don't know where else to put it, I guess. And I think that would take a big process to kind of figure out how to discipline and how to deal with phase zero, or even other kind of recruits. So I think with a lack of precedence, I guess it makes sense to do this. And also, as Kyle said, it's an atypical year for this. So I don't think it would make sense to create a whole other disciplinary policy for something that hopefully will never happen again with the phase zero lasting so long. But otherwise, the investigation was really good. And the monitoring was done well. Thank you.
So I don't have much on this. I think the classification investigation was good. I did appreciate one comment that Sergeant Williams asked during the interview with the field training officer was, do you think it was good to have a recruit in zero handle a call like this? And just, and that's what I thought about the whole time. I was hoping somebody would ask that question. So I appreciate that. And then, something a little bit that Lindsay said kind of strikes me that, should the recruit get this put against them when they're really under, especially one that hasn't even been to the academy, should it just have fallen on the field training officer as that it was really their issue and not that person's, because they should have stopped him. They should have made sure this didn't happen. That's all my only part about that.
I would agree with Bill's last comment. That's something that bothered me about the whole thing. I think the investigation was great. I have a question about the application of the use of the policy on unsatisfactory performance. The language there is, I hope that I don't offend anybody, but it's pretty poorly written. And it's kind of void for vagueness. The only particular of the three particulars that could apply there was the officer must act swiftly and appropriately in any situation requiring police intervention that comes to the employee's attention, regardless of whether or not the officer's assistance is requested. And it just seems like a junk allegation that I wouldn't recommend using in the future. That's just my feeling about it. I think it applies to both the field training officer and the trainee. Looking at that, if I read that, it wouldn't tell me what to do. Anything, it wouldn't proscribe any activity on my part, and it wouldn't prescribe any activity for me to do. It's just, when you've been notified you need to do something, you better do it swiftly. That's my problem with that one.
Sorry, can I jump in just for a sec, Carolyn? Is that okay? Okay. No, I agree with you, Rick. So Kyle was policy sergeant when we went over the code of conduct, and he and I, Kyle was awesome to work with on that. He really took in a lot of comments from us, and that was really appreciated. But I think it's one of those things that as we worked with that section of the policy, it's really hard to work with. I can look at something and say, this feels like bad performance. It doesn't necessarily feel like bad judgment. It doesn't necessarily feel like something else. It feels like performance, but the language isn't quite there. So, and the language I was trying to use was the subsection C from that section of the policy, which is you must perform the required tasks associated with your official position. But again, like even when I write it, I know it is extraordinarily vague. So I think that's something to look at for when the code of conduct comes under review again. And I appreciate you pointing that out because I have had that same thought. So thank you.
I think at least it should say something like an officer should act as a reasonably prudent officer under all the circumstances at all times, something like that. At least it gives them a standard that they can look at, some objective standard rather than it just, I don't think it's written very well.
Yeah, I'll make sure the policy sergeant knows what your comments are. Because I appreciate them. Thank you.
So I don't think I have anything really to add. I appreciate people's thoughtfulness about the issue of the phase 0 recruit. I do think that's the challenging, sticky part. So I'm glad we're talking about it, and especially if we have other cases where there's this type of issue, like who, to what level do you hold someone who there's not a reasonable expectation as a skilled officer, what they're being put in situations. So how accountable are they? I think that's, yeah, I have no good answers. I just think that those are the right questions to ask.
Yeah, I'm where are we in the rounds at this point? Is this adjudication or does it matter at this point?
We're still in complaint intake classification and investigation and monitoring.
Okay.
But we should probably pick it up. So maybe we can just talk about everything in this round if you haven't already gone, and then we can circle back.
I think that's what people have been doing. Let's see. Intake classification monitoring. Yeah, I think it's that's great. And then just I guess probably my only real remaining comment is just that I'm kind of like Bernadette. I'm really on I'm unsure about the recruit officer and to what degree. So I was rereading actually just now Leia's rationale for that, for sustaining the allegation, and now I've lost it because I take everything out of my binder. But oh, there we go. So while placing someone under arrest is a common occurrence for a police officer, it is nonetheless a significant event for the people who are arrested. It is a serious abrogation of one's freedom and rights, and the act of placing someone under arrest must be undertaken with the gravity it deserves. So that's your closing thoughts there, and I think, yeah, if I'm thinking about where that line falls for when we're going to hold someone who can't be expected to be fully culpable for everything, where we're going to hold them responsible, I think Leah makes a good point for that being on one side of that line. So yeah, I don't think I had anything else.
Excuse me for asking yet another question. It does seem like COVID had something to do with this in terms of the context. I'm wondering about this unsigned documents thing and acting on that as a, like, I don't know if I'm understanding you correctly. Is this kind of like a handshake thing where it's like, okay, we know the signature is going to come through in the matter of expediency, and right, like the language in the warrant arrests says, timely fashion, attempt to serve them, or is this kind of like a loose practice, or is this okay? is this a policy thing that we should be attending to? Like, should we not be doing this anymore? Could this situation be avoided? Me is my question.
I think it's a situation of that the attorney has the document, goes to court, gets it signed. The signed copy stays at the court. They go back to their office. They send the person the document from their computer saying, here's the document that I just took to court and got signed. So I don't think it's they're doing the easy thing out. I think it's just kind of probably the general practice, because rarely do you need a signed copy of what you got dismissed. I mean, there are times obviously that you would. And so I think there are certainly documents that you want to make sure you have a signed copy. Custody orders, if you're going to be going someplace where you're trying to pick up your kids, you're going to want a signed copy, not just a blank one. But then there's other times where it's like, you just need the wording to know what happened, and you're not going to ever have to present that copy someplace. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. I see Kyle unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought I'd pop in there also, Bree, and a lot of what, kind of backing up what Bernadette's saying, but also we have people hand us old copies and unsigned copies that may or may not have actually been what was done. That actually, I hadn't considered that component because I hadn't seen the actual document that they were handed. And that actually was insightful to me in a positive way, that he made note that it wasn't a signed version and that he definitely needed to review the latest signed copy before they saw what they might actually take action on. And so that was one of a couple of important things that should have been noted on that copy, but definitely an important piece. It would be easy to gloss over and not look at, but was important to be noted. And it, to a degree, made sense to me that he's like, well, okay, I'll look at the nuts and bolts here, but I'm not going to put too much time and effort into this because I really need to see the official one to really make a determination on how to proceed forward.
All right, I think that if you all don't mind, we can put the EPD policy practices and trainings comment section in the same time that we also talk about our feelings on adjudication, just to expedite the process a bit. And I think it is my turn to start. So I think it's hard, again, to comment on these things when it is an abnormal year, at least with the phase 0. In normal year, I'd want to talk about that as just a practice, but I think that doesn't make sense this year. And I think we've actually covered a lot of this in discussion. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that I do agree with the adjudication across the board.
So I'll keep this short. So I do agree with the adjudication on the field training officer. I still struggle with the trainee having this against him at this point when, the level they were at. So I struggle with that, and I want that to everybody to understand that, but that's it.
I agree with the adjudications on the arrests, but I disagree on the use of unsatisfactory evidence or unsatisfactory conduct. I just don't think it's specific enough to govern anybody's activities, and it doesn't really perform the basic due process notion of telling what officer what he or she's done wrong. So that would be how I'd feel about it. And I agree with Bill on the issue of the trainee. Hopefully it'll be taken into consideration in terms of discipline.
Yes, I guess I would just reiterate that I think it's worth looking at and reconsidering just generally how we do field training, and how field training officers are selected. Will this person continue to train new people? That's super problematic for me. And I agree, Rick, with your last statement that I hope that they would take that into consideration in discipline. But I think I agree with the adjudications across the board for both the phase 0 recruit and for the field training officer.
And yeah, I think I just would also I'll agree with all of the adjudications all the way down, and just hope that for the field training or for the recruit officers' sake that they have started paying their dues for the union.
Is it my turn? I think it's my turn. Okay. Yeah, I have a habit of making begrudging agreements. So I agree that allegations across the board should be sustained begrudgingly on the begrudgingly on the allegation against the zero ground officer.
So I agree with Rick on the policy, and I would hold the field training officer. I would sustain it if it was written in the way that I read it in my mind, that he violated the policy as it's written in my mind, but that's not clearly written here. So I agree with Rick that the officer should not be sustained on that one. Do think they should be sustained on the arrest. I do not think that the field training officer should be, I don't think it should be sustained. I think it should be not within policy, but unfounded, because I don't think there's enough to show that the recruit knew or had the training in order to properly do their job. As to the field training program, I think this again was an anomaly because it was the pandemic. I'm trying to say it quickly, but this could be a field training officer, given their background and experience, who would be a really good field training officer post academy. But because it was a zero recruit, there was, I think, an assumption that they knew more about police work than was reasonable. And so I think, so I'm not ready to say that this field training officer isn't probably a good candidate to be a field training officer later. But I think it's something to look at, like Kyle was saying, it's like, sometimes there are people that are really good to give you some confidence when you get on the street at the very beginning that you don't need later on when you are 12 weeks into your field training officer. And then there's people, it's like if they're taking you out and showing you the nightlife and the drug sales, in the seedy part of town, right, your first couple of weeks out of the academy, that might not be the best thing either. So I think it is a holistic thing that they need to look at as far as what really makes the most sense, which I'm sure they're doing based on how Kyle described the whole police academy and the training process. It's clearly something that they're going over a lot. They just need to continue to go over it and make it a little better.
All right. Auditor report.
Can I move to extend our meeting for 10 minutes?
Oh,
Or is 15 more realistic?
let's say 15, and if it can be 10, then that's great. So I second that movement.
You guys want to do jazz hands? Ooh, thumbs up. Okay. All right. Let the record show. Do you want me to go ahead, Carolyn? Okay, I'll keep this very short. We are muddling through. It's busy. So I just did a quick check. I think we have 82 new open complaints since the start of the year. About a little over a dozen of those are allegations of misconduct, which is, quite a clip for the first couple of months of the year. So I guess the good news is you guys will have lots of cases to review. The bad news is I may not always be writing adjudication memos for you to review and pick apart. So we're intaking a lot. Vicky and Beatrice are all over it. They've been amazing. And then we're still we've got a lot of complicated investigations that are going on. So just overview of how that's all going is just busy. Then what else do we have? Oh, hiring, but I am working on hiring. The plan right now is to hire 2 limited duration, 20 to 30 hour a week positions to backfill my position. So if you know people or are a person, but who might be interested in that, keep an eye out. We're hoping to get that posted, hopefully by the end of this week, and have it open through March, potentially through that first week of April, just because it's taken a little while to get those job descriptions written because I'm doing other things. But we are working on that. And then boards and commissions recruitment, just super quick. I have been thinking a lot during this meeting and most meetings, but this meeting especially, how I really love that this group can disagree in such a respectful way. And I feel like I really, really love that about you guys. So thank you for doing that at every meeting. And if you, I'm not sure how many openings we're going to have. We have 2 openings coming up, but I think we're going to have reapplications for both of those. So, but if you know people who, I don't know, who are the person who you disagree with nicely at a party, maybe ask them if they're interested. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested, but applications close at the end of this week. So please, if you're interested, get on that. And I am probably missing about 14 things that I wanted to tell you all about, but I failed to write them down and I should know better. So thank you. That's it.
We'll all be here next month lying on our couch like Michael.
Sounds good.
All right, closing comments. I think I'll just go ahead and start since I'm already talking. The only thing that comes to mind for me is just questioning whether or not it's reasonable for this board to do 2 cases a month. It seems like we are going over time every time we do it. So I think that's something that would be worthwhile to think about and maybe talk about again next month or at the auditor or the chair meeting, the agenda setting meeting that we have. So if anyone has thoughts on that, go ahead and email me if you want to talk about it next month, or email me with your thoughts if you want us to just talk about it at the agenda setting meeting with the chairs. So that's my thought. Bill, do you have any closing comments?
No, I really don't. I guess I just, on what you just said, Carolyn, I guess I would leave that up to you and Bernadette if you think that, a case is really going to require more conversation to only have 1 versus having 2. I think you guys should sort of play that role.
That's tricky because whenever I think that it's going to be a really quick discussion, it ends up being an hour. So I don't know that I want to be the person thinking for everyone else about if it's a long case or a short case. So, but yeah, I appreciate it. We can keep going in the same order. So Rick, do you have any closing comments?
No, I have no comments. Thank you.
I just have a question, or like something that I hope I would hope that we review the Rodriguez case sometime sooner than later. I'm dissatisfied that it has not been discussed, and I'm not like pointing fingers or blaming anybody. I'm just saying it's been way too long, and I think we need to take a look at that. So I'm anxiously awaiting the opportunity for this board to review that case, and that's it.
I bring it up at every agenda meeting, Lindsay.
I know you do. And like I said, I'm not like pointing any fingers. I'm just, wanting to say in a public space that that's super problematic and we need to look at that case.
Agreed.
As soon as it is closed, I will bring it to you. I should also tell you that I kept Mark on a contract so he can come back and talk about it because that was his case. So we are prepared, just so you all know.
I know you are.
Yeah, the issue with that is the IDFIT process was taking so long, right? Yeah.
That's not where it's sitting now.
Okay. Oh, I'm good.
My turn. Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for, again, accommodating and fielding my newbie questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry I went a little long on my constitutional law conversation on that last one, but I thought it was pretty important to really understand what was the not probable cause there, or what was the probable cause and how it went away. Leah, thank you for your brief, concise, and to the point auditor's report. So thought we were going to miss Mark, but clearly we did not. So until next month.
I want to make sure that it's clear that I wasn't saying that I think people should talk less. I want to make sure that everyone talks enough. So if that means that we only do one case a month, so everyone feels like they can get everything that they need to say out. So don't take that the wrong way, Bernadette. Anything else for the good of the order, or should we adjourn? All right, our next meeting is April 13th. Same time, same place, I assume, even though we're moving down to moderate, right?
Yes, and until the governor changes her stay home, stay lives order, we will stay on the virtual platform.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, bye-bye.